I'm going to edit this down anyway. Okay, we're good. Hello, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. I'm using my middle school teacher voice. That's you. That's me.
Is that your voice?
Yes, yeah. Okay, so we are very, very happy to welcome Constance Barone here today as part of the Battle of Ogdensburg. Constance has a bachelor's degree from Buffalo State, and she was the director of the Chemung Valley History Museum for over 24 years. And currently, she's the historic site manager at New York State Parks at the Sackett's Harbor site. And she's done that for over 22 years. So she has a ton. She is very, very knowledgeable about the War of 1812. And she's going to share with us today Sackett's Harbor's Horse Island, which was a natural island that was located in Haudenosaunee territory. And she's going to tell us why that was important. So I'm really looking forward to this, and I want to thank her for coming today.
Okay, thank you. Let's test this a bit. Can everybody hear me? Yes. Yes, in the back?
It's coming through.
Good, okay, very good. Okay, thank you so much, and thanks for being invited to be here for this weekend, which has been going on for how many years now?
Oh, gosh.
Ooh, nobody can remember.
You should know.
Well, since
Over 25.
Since the War of 1812 at least, right?
200 years, 210 years.
And as I go through the presentation today, Tim Abel, who is archaeologist, reenactor, obviously, he's in Kent today, and he's been very active with our state historic site and also our support group, our Battlefield Alliance. And Tim has done many programs for us as an archaeologist, as a historian, and as a supporter. So, Tim, if there's something incorrect here, I would like you to please speak right up. And anybody else, if you see something that's incorrect. So, yes, thank you for the introduction. And yes, so Sackett's, oops, hope this thing's going to work. Sackett's Harbor is my hometown, as it was for my parents and also my grandparents as well. So Sackett's obviously is very important to me, and after that career actually in Western Massachusetts and also in the Southern Tier in Elmira, Horseheads, after my husband retired from teaching, we moved back to Sackett's Harbor, and that's how I've ended up there as a, they call it a boomerang, returning. The presentation I'm doing today I've actually done a couple of times. First time was with the Antique Boat Museum in Clayton for one of their programs, so it's been done there. And then the State Historic Site Lorenzo in Cazenovia did it there. And what's interesting is there's always somebody in the audience who has some sort of connection to Horse Island. And today I've already met a gentleman here who used to go duck hunting at Horse Island. So that is one of the many things that have happened at Horse Island. I'm going to read a bit as well as we go along, but then I will also divert from the script. But there's quite a bit that I want to cover on this, and many different aspects of the history of Horse Island. So Sackett's Harbor's strategic location on the eastern end of Lake Ontario made it the only possible site for the American Military Command during the War of 1812 on the U.S. side at the eastern end of Lake Ontario. The natural harbor, as mentioned, was located in Haudenosaunee territory and became the hub of activity for shipbuilding, drawing thousands of personnel and a place to amass war material. So in the northern part of New York State, Sackett's Harbor became the site of both offensive and defensive actions during the war years. Horse Island, linked to Sackett's Harbor's mainland by a submerged causeway, played a significant role in the 29 May 1813 Second Battle of Sackett's Harbor. Later, lighthouse keepers and their families called it home on Black River Bay. The National Park Service designated Sackett's Harbor as one of the top War of 1812 sites in the country due to the outcome of this battle and also the threat to battlegrounds, the preservation of battlegrounds. And I'll mention a little bit more about that as we go on. In 2017, the American Battlefield Trust, formerly the Civil War Trust, recognized the island's multinational significance and made the island and mainland parcel their very first War of 1812 acquisition in the country. Consequently, New York State Parks now holds a unique island central to what parks like to say is our whole history. And I think at this point I also want to add in that since the last time I gave the presentation, the American Battlefield Trust has also purchased the Bolton Farm, which is a 85-acre parcel of battlegrounds. So that is now added, well, soon to be added to New York State Parks. So as I go through the program today, this is the outline. These are the topics that I'll be covering. So our introduction are the indigenous people associated with this space, early settlement, War of 1812, the 19th century to now, lighthouses, archaeology, and this is where I'd like Tim to jump in if need be, Great Lakes Underwater Sanctuary, the human history meets natural history, and our shared future. So the indigenous people hunted and fished the eastern end of Lake Ontario. And today, it is considered a Native American pathway, an archaeological district. Tim, are you familiar with that through Ken Knapp?
Mm-hmm.
Yep, okay. So you can Google that, look into that more if you wish. The lake as a thoroughfare allowed early cultures of the late woodland and Iroquois cultures to exchange ideas as they traveled the waterways. Lake Ontario is an environment where the Onondaga people lived, fished, hunted, and gathered for thousands of years. Now, several years ago, Joseph Heath, Esquire of the Onondaga Nation General Council said, quote, "The cultural, spiritual, historic, archaeological, and environmental connections of the Onondaga Nation and the Haudenosaunee to Lake Ontario and its eastern shore is undeniable. But, unfortunately, it is not currently well known," end quote. Something else to Google and to look into. We do not know how this 28-acre egg-shaped island got its name. So if there's anybody here who could suggest how we're going to find that out. I know a lot of people have looked for this over the years, but we have not figured that out as yet. Any new news for us, Tim?
So there is a legend about wild horses grazing on the island. And the legend is that those horses were speculated to be left from the DeBar expedition of 1666, when his forces were landed there over the winter after his expedition to Onondaga. A winter encampment which gave Chameau Bay its name, Baie de la Famine, which is Hungry Bay. So his forces, while he left and went back to Montreal, his forces stayed there and basically starved to death, and had to eat several of the horses. But several of the horses they also set free, and rumor legend is that those horses were still grazing in and around the island in 1803 when.
Okay. I like that one. But where'd they get their oats all those years?
That I don't know.
Okay. Thank you, Tim. As settlers arrived at Mr. Sackett's harbor, Thomas L. Ogden owned Horse Island. Squire Reed's farm was located on the mainland opposite Horse Island, and that was ground zero in spring 1813. And consequently, both U.S. and enemy forces destroyed Mr. Reed's farm, his home, his ashery, and the premises. And for years, Squire Reed's descendants tried to claim compensation for damages from the U.S. federal government. This slide, we've added, I added just in the last couple of years, the very large map that you can see, which is hand-drawn with also some color on there, some green. This was from the Elijah Camp estate. And in the village, Elijah Camp and Augusta Sackett were the co-founders of Sackett's Harbor. Elijah Camp's home, which still exists today, as well as Mr. Sackett's home. And actually, Tim did a lot of archaeology around the Sackett home a number of years ago. But Elijah Camp and his descendants through 9 generations saved every scrap of paper that they ever dealt with. And a few years ago, the most current family members did not want to retain that, and so it went to auction. But fortunately, it was all saved, and it was donated to Cornell University. So Cornell has done all the finding aids on the collection, and you can look online and see what that collection consists of. So this map, the early map of how the village was going to be laid out, is really a very wonderful, wonderful piece, which was only discovered a few years ago. Another early map, I know most of you toward the back did not see this, but this is 1835, and there's a squiggly line that goes from the bottom right, loops to the left, and then down through the village, and that was a camp's ditch. So within the Camp family, they had this ditch or canal created from near Watertown down across the land to Sackett's Harbor, and this was a canal for power, for mills. It was not for riding on. Okay, so here we are, War of 1812. Now fortunately, in addition to a recent cultural resources survey on Horse Island, there exist many primary historical documents recounting the battle in the form of diaries, letters, military logs, and published collections. And these are certainly documents that Tim and other archaeologists have used to do their study of the battlegrounds, that Bolton Farm property, as well as Horse Island. Okay, so before dawn on 29 May 1813, the British and Canadian 33 troop-laden bateaux and birch canoes of the Mohawk and Mississauga moved toward the Sackett's Harbor mainland, directly southwest of Horse Island, precisely as the Americans had anticipated. The red X is showing where the Crown forces were coming toward Sackett's Harbor, having come across the lake from Kingston, Upper Canada. And the contemporary photograph on the upper right is photographed just about where the red X would be on the map. So you can get a visual of what they were seeing as they were approaching the island. And in the distance, you were seeing the cliffs, these 30-foot high cliffs at Sackett's Harbor. Obviously, you're not going to try to land there. And then if you went around the corner of that area, you would be at the harbor. And then the harbor was protected with artillery at Fort Volunteer as well as Fort Tompkins. So Horse Island was the place to land. About 3 weeks prior to that May 29, 1813, several hundred men of the Albany Volunteers under Colonel John Mills established Camp Volunteer on Horse Island to defend it and as that first point of contact. There were There were men and the 6-pounder cannon on the mainland shore, northeast of that submerged causeway that links the island to the mainland. Joining Mills on the island was Captain Kellogg's Volunteer Artillery Company, positioned their 1 6-pounder cannon. On the fateful day in May, Brigadier General Jacob Brown commanded the New York Militia and Volunteers. He positioned Lieutenants Colonel Tuttle and Sprague's New York Militia battalions along the shore of the mainland, southwest of the causeway. And you can sort of see that in that little illustration of the top center. And in that illustration, toward the bottom of it, there's a square that's delineated, and that is that farm that got demolished, both by the Americans scavenging from the farm. They even tore up the turf, and they took the fences, they tore the wood from the house, everything that they needed. And then, of course, the battle came through that way. Okay, the map, for those of you interested in maps, bottom right, the map is a McCombs map. So 2 British gunboats led the 4 a.m. assault force, providing covering fire for the amphibious assault. Detected by the Americans, these boats received devastating musket and cannon shot. The landing plan changed to the north side of the island after the invading forces sustained many casualties, and also the wind changed as well. So in the sketchy little map on the right, we see Horse Island, the lump off the mainland, and then you can see how the bateaux are illustrated there to the right of the island coming toward the mainland, and the causeway showing. With the Crown Forces was Voltigeur Canadien Jacques Vigier, who reported, quote, "We were advancing slowly and with little noise along the canal," which he means the causeway area, "which divides Horse Island from the mainland, thinking about taking the enemy by surprise. When, perfectly awake and on guard, we found it, the militia, scattered over the 2 shores and posted behind the trees which border them," end quote. Vigier describes the 2 shores as on the island and the mainland, and this is a critical juncture as the battle unfolds. Once on the island, the British quickly drove the volunteers to the mainland, with Colonel Edward Baines ordering a bayonet charge across the causeway. The water was at a depth at that time where the Crown Forces could wade across. The water was about chest deep. Led by the 100th Regiment of Foot, along with elements of the Royal Scots and the 8th Regiment of Foot. On the mainland shore at the causeway, General Brown's militia fired 1 volley before they abandoned the Albany Volunteers to face the brunt of the British charge alone. Consequently, Lieutenant Colonel Mills was killed in the assaults, supporting fire from the 2 British gunboats. So we have illustration, an engraving of Brown off to the right, Jacob Brown, and then on the left is a scan of a letter that talks about the death of Lieutenant Colonel Allectus Bacchus of the 1st Light Dragoons. Now again, up in the top left, we have Jacques Vigier's map that he drew after the battle, of course. And on the right is McCombs' map from 1812. So after about a 3-hour engagement, the invaders retreated, again making use of Horse Island, where they took time to help themselves in the abandoned camp volunteering. Another beautiful image of Vigier's map in 1839. The island's importance included a British casualty treatment and evacuation point on the southeast side by the causeway, where the Voltigeurs surgeon, Dr. Toussaint Casimir Truteau, tended the Crown Force's wounded and dying. Eventually, in late afternoon, loading the wounded onto boats for the return trip to Kingston, Canada. Today, military staff rides are common at the historic site, following along the battle route, stopping at the island's mainland shore. Here, soldiers study the terrain and logistics for lessons learned. And primarily these days, most of our staff rides are done with soldiers who are at Fort Drum, which is only 20 miles away, often with the 10th Mountain Division, but also any of the National Guard units that come to train at Fort Drum. We used to, back in the day, have staff rides coming over from RMC Kingston, the Royal Military College at Kingston, led by Major John Grudinsky, who did a great deal of research and writing about the War of 1812. Now, 19th century, up to now. Over the next 200 years, despite changes and improvements to the facilities at Sackett's Harbor, in and around the harbor, there appears to have been little in the way of major improvements on Horse Island, where the landing and troop movement focused on the opposite mainland shore. So this, I can't remember if this is the 1930s or a little bit later. View of Sackett's Harbor, looking from the northeast. There's the peninsula, the Hook, which is the Navy Point, bottom right. And then off to the top right, Horse Island. This is also interesting because out on the fields in the left there are two big oil tanks, and some just across that road there are more big oil tanks. And that would be
Everybody's got
Hawkesbury.
it.
Yes.
Still cleaning up.
So we have our very own Hawkesbury oil tank farm there as well, which has been cleaned up. And so where the two are in sort of in the middle, this is property that's owned by the village and the LDC, Land Development Corporation. And then if you head west past those tanks, which are no longer there, it is the Bolton Farm. So from this roadway on the left, all the way across to the right, minus the houses along the shore, will be all preserved battlegrounds. So it's a magnificent piece of property that's being added to over time, including our wonderful Horse Island. This map we just found a few years ago, which is pretty interesting. Of interest is a railroad depot plan proposed in 1853. And this is a map showing an extensive rail shipping complex where rail lines would have crossed from the mainland to a series of wharfs on Horse Island, where vessels would load and unload freight. And fortunately, the plan didn't materialize.
They did it in Ogdensburg. At least you didn't have to clean up the railroad.
Okay, now, in 2017, the American Battlefield Trust bought the island and mainland property from the Martin family. And we have a gentleman here in the audience who was duck hunting out there when the Martin family owned that property. And as I said, the Trust's first War of 1812 battlegrounds land purchased in the country and has subsequently become part of New York State Parks. So let's see, Battlefield Trust sign. And then over on the left, the map looking down onto the community. And you can see, based on the number of streets in the community, that this is a very large, significant area that is very relevant to our history and the War of 1812.
What does it mean that the outline goes into the water? Do they have?
Because we have underwater archaeology as well. And back in the 1980s, in the harbor, where there is the remains of the USS Jefferson, there were several seasons when underwater archaeologists studied that site. And since then, we have had other underwater archaeologists come to the community. A young gentleman, Ben Ford, who teaches in Pennsylvania. Ben had done a study, but most recently, NOAA. NOAA's, I don't know if you heard about their Great Lakes Sanctuary project, which just last September was finally designated after 25 years of effort. And the Great Lakes, Eastern Lake Ontario Great Lakes Sanctuary goes from Pulteneyville near Rochester, all along the shoreline to Cape Vincent. So this becomes, I think, the 17th underwater sanctuary that NOAA manages.
So
And several summers ago, I think I have another slide that shows their technicians and archaeologists. They did quite an extensive study a few years ago in our area. And with that designation last September, I understand that there apparently are magnificent archaeological cultural resources underwater in and around Saggets.
So it's protected.
Is to be protected, yes, which is wonderful. Okay, jumping to lighthouses. Do you have anybody here who likes lighthouses? Yes, oh good, okay, there's always one or two lighthouses, yeah. Okay, after a more lasting peace had been achieved, in 1831, Mr. Ogden sold the island to the federal government for $500. Okay, where they built a $4,000 lighthouse with a beacon, which could be seen 13 miles away. Now, Samuel McNitt, who was a captain with the militia during the Second Battle of Sackett's Harbor, had become lighthouse keeper in a time frame, he was there between 1835 and 1860. A few views of the Horse Island Light Station. Top one, 1885, 1899, tower heightened, bottom right. So the light was upgraded in 1857 with a fifth order Fresnel lens. And 1870, a new brick structure replaced the lighthouse, just 300 yards southeast of its predecessor. The lighthouse square tower received a 10-foot addition in 1899, raising it to 55 and a half feet tall. A list of head of lighthouse keepers include, we have Lorenzo Root, Mr. Westcott, McFarland, Meeks, Holloway's, Ward, Simmons, and then Julia, the wife, becomes a lighthouse keeper in the 1930s. The reason I have the picture of the rooster down there is because Julia kept chickens. And many of these lighthouse keepers had a farm there on the island, and she was particularly known for the chickens that she kept. Now, one thing, you know how history begins to evolve, and you have all these wonderful discoveries that happen periodically. So last fall, the descendants of George Ward stopped by, and they have the lighthouse keeper's records. They have Mrs. Ward's daily diary. It's just a wonderful collection. And so they stopped by to see, would we be interested? Yes. So they had to go back, of course, and confer with family members. And, you know, sometimes people are afraid of the state. And so they wanted to make sure that if they donated, these would go into good hands. So I gave them a few weeks, got in touch with them again, they said yes. But then that was about when all of our storms and our lake effect storms were starting, and these family members live in Pulaski, so they're down in lake effect territory. So I communicated with them just recently, said yes, once we stop the lake effect storms, they will be stopping by to see us. So that was a wonderful And just a little bit more on the keepers, Horace Holloway was a Civil War veteran. He passed away in May 1920 at the age of 84. And then George Ward, 1909 to 1926, whose wife was the daughter of Holloway. And they particularly noted rescuing some people when a boat struck the island in 1918. And then Schuyler Simmons, 1926, 1933. After his death, his wife Julia farmed the tillable 17 acres of the 24-acre island. And she did that for 3 years. Julia kept a horse, a cow, a young bull that was, quote, friendly as a house dog, unquote, and a flock of Plymouth Rock chickens that were so tame that they would perch on her shoulders. In 1925, the light changed from a fixed oil light to an automated flashing acetylene light. And here are two contemporary images on the right side. So at the point where American Battlefield Trust was wanting to purchase, the property became for sale, and that's why we have those two photographs. The realtor did those photographs. Now, just another note about the American Battlefield Trust. At about that time, we had actually before that, we had a phone call at the office, and the man identified himself as from the American Battlefield Trust. He said, we are going to start buying War of 1812 property. What do you have? And I said, well, Horse Island would be good to look at someday. Bolton Farm would be nice to look at. The LDC land, that would be a really great area all through there. So he said, okay, thank you. And then he called back maybe a month later, and he said, hi, calling again. Horse Island just went up for sale, and we bought it. And I said, you mean you're going to buy it? No, it just went up for sale, and we bought it. So that's how they work. And since then, they've been looking at the LDC land. They've also been looking, of course, at the Bolton Farm, and they bought that. Now, the following year after 1925, the lake water level was so low that vehicles could be driven across the causeway to and from the island. If we look to the far left, the larger image, the roadway may have existed even earlier because we know of a teenager around 1929 who was hired to work with other young men building up the Causeway Road with rocks from the lake bottom. And in recent years, in 2017 and 19, the water levels were at a record low. So our employees easily were walking back and forth to be able to go out and do maintenance on the island. Okay, 1957 and 58, 57 and 58, an automated light was installed on the Coast Guard metal skeletal tower, replacing the function of the lighthouse. Do we have any birders in the group? Everybody who's a birder? Okay, so the tower, this is a close-up of the top portion of the tower. Can you tell what all the squiggly lines are?
Nests.
Osprey nest. Yes. So that's a veritable apartment house for the osprey. The island was sold in December 1958 by the General Services Administration to the Carl Martin family. And at that time, it was even suggested the island become a bird sanctuary. Okay, Tim, jump in here. Okay, so in 2019, the National Park Service American Battlefield Protection Program funded a detailed historical and military terrain analysis of the island by SUNY Binghamton's Public Archaeology Facility. The goal of the archaeology survey was to identify the location of principal sites, such as the British landing, along with any engagement between British and Americans on the island during the battle. Just over 200 years after the battle, archaeologists reported evidence clearly indicating Americans and British sniping at each other prior to British forces landing on and near the island, while the Americans were withdrawing as planned and the British advancing over the causeway. The archaeologists used a COCOA analysis tool that seeks to see a battle commander's view of the battlefield. The report states, quote, "The American resistance and eventual withdrawal from Horse Island is documented in the primary accounts from both the British and American viewpoint. And today, the position of dropped British 6 caliber and 69 caliber lead balls and fired American 64 caliber lead balls was found. The recovered lead balls indicate what the primary documents recorded. The British force landed on the north and northeast shore of the island. The clustering of American dropped lead balls here shows Americans tempted to resist," end quote. Quote again from the archaeologists, "The position of British dropped lead balls near the landing area indicates the landing was successful and the British firing line established, and pushed the Americans, the Albany Volunteers, southeast towards the causeway off the island. A single British dropped musket ball on the western side of the island and 2 fired American lead balls may represent British skirmishes along the British right flank, clearing the Americans from the island. British dropped balls funneled towards the causeway as they began the advance to the main shoreline," end quote. Overall, using primary documents and today's archaeology methods, such as COCOA, we learned, quote, "During the retreat, Captain Jacques Vigier, Provincial Corps of Light Infantry, Canadian Voltigeurs, noted that an American camp with tents was discovered and pillaged by British forces before embarking on their boats to return to the British fleet." He continued, American, and end quote for Vigier. And then we have another quote. American Private Balthazar Kramer wrote to his wife that the Albany Volunteers had lost their clothing and belongings when they had retreated from the island. The campsite is a defining feature of Horse Island. And this is on the right and in the center. Actually, all 3 of these are pages from the American Battlefield Trust magazine. The archaeologists reported, quote, "GIS military analysis applications provided an interpretive model of British gunboat firing positions during the approach prior to the troop landings on Horse Island, the American firing positions on the island and their range of fire, the approximate locations of disembarking British troops, and predicted American rifle positions on the main shore flanking the causeway," end quote. So GIS is a computer system that analyzes and displays geographically referenced information. And thanks to many archaeologists who have worked at Sackett's Harbor over the past 70 years on land and underwater, adding to this knowledge base. Tim, is there anything you would want to add there? Any comments? Disputing?
No. Well, one of the things we always have to be careful of, and this is a tendency of a lot of archaeologists working in the area, is that we often assume that every 75 caliber ball we find is British and every 69 caliber ball we find is American.
Right.
And pretty much every 69 caliber ball probably is American, but Americans also use Brown Besses, especially in the militia. So you cannot say that just because it's a 75 caliber ball that it is British.
That's right.
So we always have to be careful and leery of that assumption.
Okay. And it's handy that Tim is a reenactor,
Yes,
and these archaeologists were not,
Oh,
so. So was nice to have Tim, boots on the ground. And thank you to Tim. Okay, I mentioned NOAA, Great Lakes Underwater Sanctuary. So the Sackets Harbor Battlefield State Historic Site falls within NOAA's newly designated Great Lakes National Marine Sanctuary plan. Sackets Harbor region boasts a long history of human engagement with the maritime environment, and the State Historic Site specifically interprets the tumultuous early history of our nation and the War of 1812. And this all falls within this new sanctuary. Results from archaeological surveying the mainland, Horse Island, and past offshore underwater areas support research and contributions to the understanding of the 1813 Second Battle of Sackets Harbor. These archaeology and cultural resources surveys contribute to ongoing scholarship and offer additional opportunities for our site visitors and even, of course, our community members. This drone image, which is courtesy of NOAA, which I just realized after looking at this many, many times, that kind of in the center, there's a little black dot. That is one of their other drones, and it has some cable coming down from the drone. So I said a number of years ago they were at the site. Well, they spent 10 days around Sackets exploring over the water, under the water, and then they did a public information session for us. So I've just now noticed the other day that drone
Yeah, duck.
sitting there. Okay, now we've got human history and natural history meet. So Tim, you're very familiar with the community and our cliffs. I don't understand how the photographer took this photo.
I would imagine he's either on a point. He's probably on the Fort Tompkins Point.
He's really strange.
Oh yeah, he's hanging over the edge. Yeah.
Hanging over the edge. Yeah, we look at this many times and just trying to figure out how did the photographer do this. And way in the back in the distance, of course, is Horse Island, and there's not much foliage on the island, so certainly as the lighthouse keepers were farming. But wow, look at those waves. Okay. The island's natural environment remains relatively undisturbed, with little public access during private ownership from 1957 to 2017, so a 60-year period. Geologically, Horse Island and its mainland connection bridge the divide between nature and culture. Here, geology, human history, and climate converge, creating this very diverse habitat. The island offers exceptional bird watching for eagles, kingfisher, plover, and mallards. One year when I was kayaking around the island, I watched two bald eagles just come up out of the trees together, kind of skirmishing, and then they settle down, and the pair of them just sail away. So that was pretty impressive. And there's an eagle there, the lighthouse as it looks today. And this is on the shore. The water's high there, so the causeway, there's only a couple rocks showing with the causeway. Okay, and these images are kind of tiered here to give you the impression of like the Horse Island, and then Horse Island, the mainland, and then Sackets, Henderson Bay, and then here we are with New York State in the Northeast. So each aspect of the landscape, cultural, environmental, and physical, is all interrelated. So in the maritime culture landscape, individual sites are treated as features within the larger landscape. These individual places make up a larger region. So the link between the land and the water, between the prehistoric and the historic, provide a different way of looking at a place, simply called Horse Island. And archaeologist Ben Ford's work on coastal archaeology is a good source to explore this topic. Oh, there's my kayak. A planned environmental management approach will protect native habitats, biodiversity, and freshwater resources. This dovetails perfectly with the New York State Parks goal to manage the island for recreation use while preserving cultural, archaeological history, and historic resources such as the lighthouse keeper's home, the lighthouse and the home. And then the bottom right is a finger dock. 2 of those were added just 2 years ago, so that you can land a boat at the dock and go onto the island. This outdoor experience can be explored on preserved land open to the public. The island and contiguous mainland property connects us all to our shared heritage, a place of delight, adventure, curiosity, and beauty. So we've looked at the geography of the land, the multiple cultural and military impacts on the island, and the notion that the island and the mainland are linked or bridged. Today, Horse Island retains its strategic importance, but in a unique cultural and environmental setting of significance to multiple nations. And recently, last year, Chief Carr visited Horse Island mainland Rocky Shore, where she placed ceremonial tobacco, recognizing the significant place of her ancestors. Chief Carr is from the Mississauga of Rice Lake, Hiawatha Nation, and in Ontario, Canada. Her gesture at Horse Island mainland end of the causeway speaks to the Hiawatha First Nation values statement, which ends with this notion, quote, "A healthy way of life through the teachings passed down from ancestors," end quote. So a perfect example of our New York State parks, our shared heritage and our shared future. This used to be the last slide, but last summer, who was at the War of 1812 Grand Tactical in Sackett's Harbor? Okay,
Oh dear.
this is our new finale. Can you find your tent?
Hotel room is down the
So
road.
we are looking from the Navy Yard, the State Historic Site, Navy Yard buildings here in front of us. And during the Grand Tactical last summer, all of the Navy personnel were camped in the Navy Yard. And then just outside the fence, Tim, where were you?
I think my tent is like maybe 4th one in on the second.
Oh dear.
Fourth in from the left, okay. So in the Memorial Tree Grove, we had the encampments, and then a little further on, you see a bit of a large barn that's red, so that's also part of the property. And the state owns another big 30 acres down there, and pretty soon, all the way as far as you can see, the trees on the shoreline, that'll all be state parks for the public, and of course Horse Island, the green spot off to the right. So, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Any questions?
Yes, I have one question.
Okay.
What does that have to do with Ogdensburg?
What does it have to do with
Yeah.
Ogdensburg? Or
Somebody told me that Horse Island was out in the, under the water, right between here and Prescott. I was told that today. So where was
That's
it?
Chimney, right?
It's Chimney Island.
Huh?
It's called Chimney Island, the one
Somebody
here.
said Horse Island was here. Well, if it's where you say this, what does that have to do with what we celebrated today? I don't understand. I'm Canadian, I don't understand.
Oh, okay, well, because the first and second battles of Sackett's Harbor,
What's that have to do with here?
well, it was a big war.
I
They
know
covered a
you-
lot of territory. Yes, Europe and US and, yeah, okay. So this is another aspect of the War of 1812. It just happens to be down on Lake
What does it
Ontario.
have to do with Ogdensburg? Nothing.
No.
Nothing.
We're just
Yeah.
commemorating the War of 1812 this
It's
weekend.
another spot in the
Well,
bell.
No,
we
can
enjoyed-
never make
we
the Battle
enjoyed
of
the
Ogdensburg
presentation
this week.
anyway.
The
Well,
battle.
No, thank you for your question.
It's genuine.
Yes, it is a genuine question. I
And
don't
I was
know,
told it
maybe.
was out in the lake.
It is
Obviously, someone told you something.
Well, some of the stuff she said was an error. I know one of the things she said.
Well,
was
we
not-
most of us enjoyed this.
I did, I really did, I enjoyed it. I really paid very good attention.
So
Yes.
I will tell you
question.
that the forces that fought here
Yeah,
were headquartered in Sackett's Harbor.
okay.
And a lot of the events that took place here would not have taken place had not it been for Sackett's
They
Harbor.
took place here.
Yes.
And didn't we go there
They
after
went
this
Yes.
battle?
Yes.
We skedaddled from Ogdensburg.
The
to
forces
Sackets.
that evacuated Ogdensburg made their way back to Sackett's Harbor.
Okay.
And they came from Sackett's Harbor to come here in 1812 to begin with. So
But so what?
So Sackett's was a major military base.
But what does that have to do with the Battle of Ogdensburg?
They're linked.
Nothing.
They're linked.
They're
They are
linked.
linked.
they're linked.
Because we left from here to go there.
Okay.
That's part of it.
And we left Sackett's to come here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Should have come from Pop.
I'm not surprised.
Well, think about it.
Question?
Yeah, I was told that they called it Horse Island because the military kept their horses
Yeah.
there so they wouldn't be stolen.
Right.
Could be
That's
two.
what I understood.
That could be two.
Huh?
That could be two.
Yeah, and that could be. And also in early settlements, from what I've read, that to keep the horses and the cattle away from the panthers and
The
the
wild
wolves,
panthers.
that you would put them on an island as well. But there's also another story that Ulysses S. Grant, who was posted in Sackett's Harbor twice in the late 1850s, that he used to ride his horse out on Horse Island. But of course, it was Horse Island long before Ulysses S. Grant was there.
Yeah.
So we've got lots of good stories. I like Tim's is good, except, you know.
Well, I mean, isn't it labeled Horse Island in Vigier's map?
Yes.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
it was known as Horse Island way back in 1814, 1813, so.
Yeah, so earlier, yes, behind Tim?
Are the cliffs in that area where the causeway is not as high as they are, like where the
There are no
Commandant's house
cliffs.
is?
None there.
So it's
There are
kind of
no
level?
Yes,
Yeah.
as you go toward the village, the cliffs begin to build.
Okay. And can people go on Horse Island now?
Yes.
Yes, that's why the two
I don't
docks
want
were
to,
installed.
you probably wouldn't want to be out there now.
No, I don't mean
But-
now.
In the spring, in the
In the
spring, yeah.
summer, like if we come to the reenactment,
You know, actually, today would be very easy to get to Horse Island because it's so frozen.
Okay.
Yeah.
And it's, when I've kayaked around there and just looking, before we were allowed, just looking up there, it looked like it was very thick, dense,
Very
brushy on
Yeah,
the shore.
there are trails that they keep maintaining,
But,
but,
and it looks like from the photographs, it's meadowy in the interior.
In the middle.
Yes.
Yes, near the lighthouse, because they, the lighthouse keepers had farmed it. And then the Martin family, they had horses, their own horses out there too. So they had the stables and then they wanted the open space and the trails.
And the lighthouse is still there?
Oh,
It is, Parcel will eventually rehab it.
Okay, nice. I'm gonna explore there.
Yes, and yes, I must tell you though, with the two docks, it's not at all easy for a kayak. So you just
Land on the
beach your
shore.
kayak on the shore, on the sand, and
Okay.
the zebra mussel shell shore.
Yeah, I remember
Yes.
rock
When
shells.
we used to
on
hunt there, it
north
would
side.
depend on the water level.
Yep.
If it was low enough, we could drive a four-wheel pickup truck over the island.
Ah.
If it was too high, we'd have to take a boat.
Uh-huh.
So we never knew till we got there what we were gonna get.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Any more questions? Any more trick questions?
How far from shore?
oh,
Not very
300
very far.
yards.
Yeah.
Yes?
you can almost throw it
I was
back.
wondering, so there's lots of archaeological work has been done, but is there any areas that haven't been touched yet, maybe are planned digs, any sort of future plans?
Well, the archaeology team who did that study, there were a lot of areas they couldn't get to because of all the foliage and the trees. So, yes, there still is a lot there. And on the mainland, which would be our state property, the LDC land, and the Bolton Farm, that big swath, Hartkin archaeologists did a study there in, 2007?
5, 7, something like
5,
that.
somewhere around there. And they were supposed to, that was also through the American Battlefield, the National Park Service American Battlefield Protection Program. And they were supposed to have done a lot more, but there were some extenuating circumstances. They only got about 10% of the project completed. And so what they found was really quite wonderful. And we have, during the War of 1812 bicentennial, in one of our buildings, created an exhibition all about archaeology on the site. And then the exhibit designers used some of the material from the Hartkin explorations. And one of the most interesting pieces was the musket ball. Tim, you want to talk about that?
So they actually tested, I think, 5 or 6 musket balls from the battlefield that they excavated, and they found blood residues on 2 of them.
Wow.
And they turned out to be human blood residues.
So if you go out exploring, tooling around, and you find something, should you leave it, not touch it, and just report it, or
You could let us know.
You should definitely report it.
Don't-
You should definitely not take it with you.
I found gold?
You know, actually, when the Binghamton archaeology team started their study, they were just sort of walking around a little bit to kind of get the lay of the land. And on the shore, they did find a portion of an exploded bomb from the War of 1812 period. So we have so many storms on Lake Ontario, and it churns up what's on the bottom. Because after World War II, when scuba diving became so popular, those areas through there have been absolutely scoured and picked over
Chimney Island.
by, on land, the pot hunters, and underwater, the scuba divers. So a tremendous amount of material has left the area. But when I started my job there, 22 years ago, well, the first thing I asked our headquarters at the Bureau of Historic Sites about archaeology, I wanted to do a little exhibit, an exhibit case about archaeology. So I said, okay, so how many pieces do we have? Because they're not stored at our site. And he looked and said, 97,000 pieces.
You're gonna need a new building for that.
And he said, and there's a lot we haven't processed. So right after World War II, there was a gentleman from Pennsylvania, Colonel Campbell, who came to Sackett's Harbor, very enthusiastic about doing archaeology. He was an amateur, untrained, but he worked for the Pennsylvania Historical Commission. And he actually bought a piece of land right next to what became the historic site so that he could spend his summers there digging. And he explored various places. Came up with a lot of the cap plates.
Shako plates.
Beautiful
That
Shako
was
cap
his.
plates.
That was his thing. He gave away virtually everything else, but he kept the Shako plates.
Yeah. And we were still trying to get those from one of his sons. But, when I was
Good
growing
luck
up in
with that.
Sackett as a young person, I used to sit and watch him. In the summer, I'd sit on a pile of dirt as he was digging away, and I said, oh, someday I want to be an archaeologist, which I didn't. But, I was like maybe in junior high school. When I came back to Sackett's to take this job, I found where he was in Pennsylvania, and I wrote him a letter. And I said, hey, I understand you have this great collection. Would you consider, donating it? He wrote me a wonderful letter back, and a lot of the collection was with the Pennsylvania Historical Commission. And Parks did find it. It was stored, and Pennsylvania Historical Commission repatriated it to the state, to New York State. And so pieces from Colonel Campbell's collection are part of that exhibition that we have today. So history going around in big circles, and now we're waiting for that lighthouse keeper's logbook to come up to us after the lake effect storms. So, okay.
Well, thank you very much, Carmen. We really appreciate it. We are a nonprofit, so if you enjoyed the lecture today, we would appreciate donations if you're willing to do that. And thank you all for coming. This was wonderful.
Thank you. Okay, your technology is wonderful.
Dinner started.
Yeah, we never Very nice. That's always fun. That's always fun. Also, trying to figure out
I know.
They had a building with
All the stuff that. Well, Campbell, but
City.